Hi there, I'm not going to leave you in suspense. The answer to the question, will AI kill English language teaching, is, I think, no. That's the short answer. So you're happy to leave now if you wish. I think there is a longer answer, which is no, but with some sort of qualifications or suggestions for what we as teachers and what we might do with our students in class might be affected by AI, and you can stick around for that if you wish. But if you want to leave now, you can. That's fine. Now, this is going to be a bit of a kind of a meandering wander around what I'm thinking around AI at the moment. You also might be wondering, well, why should I care what you think about it? And that's a very, very good question. I don't claim to be any kind of expert on AI. The only thing I can say is that for the last few years, I was working at a university here in the UK at an English language teaching centre, and I was the sort of the technology director. And I had to deal a lot with policies and procedures and materials around AI. So I had a lot of chance to look at it and think about it and talk about it with different people. And a lot of these ideas really are coming from that process. Okay. However, I think to start off, what I would like to say is don't worry if you feel completely overwhelmed by AI. Okay. I feel overwhelmed by it. And I look at it and talk about it and think about it every day. I've got various social media feeds set up, and there's just so much information coming through about AI. It seems like every single day something new happens, some new development, some new leap, which means it can do amazing things that it couldn't do before. And that was always a challenge when I was working at the university here in the UK, because we would look at it one day AI and we say, no, it can't do that, or it can do that. And then 2 weeks later, yeah, it can do that. And so if students wanted to use it to cheat or plagiarize or things like that, they could easily do that. So it's totally overwhelming. I completely understand if teachers just want to get away from it, phase out from it, don't think about it. And that's perfectly reasonable. But at the same time, I can understand people feeling anxious about it as well. Do I need to keep up with AI? Is it going to affect my job if I don't? Am I going to be seen as an old-fashioned Luddite or a technophobe if I don't learn all these things about AI? And I can understand all of those fears. These are perfectly reasonable fears that teachers have. Right. So what I want to do today really is to sort of talk through AI, try to put it within a reasonable context, and also try to reassure you as teachers that perhaps you don't need to be so scared and worried and anxious about it as you might be. Okay, because there are some positives about it, and also I don't think it's going to have quite this kind of massive effect that everyone says on language teaching. Now, I think one way to think about this is if we go back a bit in time, and I've been around for over 30 years in English language teaching, and I've seen a lot of technologies during that period. From the early days when I first started teaching, we had things like language labs, but then we had computers, then we had the internet, then we had mobile phones, and then coming through to things like virtual reality, and now obviously AI. At every single stage with those technologies, someone, often myself, would start to think, well, is this going to kill English language teaching? Why would students come to class if they can access all of this wonderful content and materials through these other means which are not a teacher? And yet at every stage people have asked that question, and every stage people have speculated that it's going to kill language teaching, but it never does. Okay? There is something very, very sort of sticky in the modern parlance about classroom teaching, which makes it very difficult for technologies to completely replace it. Okay, you would think that any of these technologies would have killed language teaching ages ago, and yet thousands and thousands of people still keep coming to classes to learn English. And by that I don't mean students at school, they have to learn it. I'm talking about sort of adults and teenagers and people like that who come to private language schools because they feel that's the only real way that they can learn a language. There is that kind of human emotion, human contact that people actually need when learning something, whether it's a language or a musical instrument or anything like that, that makes it far more meaningful for them to engage with another human being. Now, I've seen lots of people suggest at various conferences and on various videos that AI, like many technologies before it, will change the way that we teach. And you'll hear phrases like, well, we're going to move away from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. By that, we're going to be less at the front of the classroom teaching and more just sort of guiding and setting up activities for students. And it's one of those phrases that sounds wonderful when you hear it, and it feels very sort of, natural and meaningful for what might happen in the classroom as we get students to use the technology, but we're sort of guiding them with it and helping them with it, setting up activities, and they're doing things in groups and pairs. And that's fine if you're teaching small groups in well-resourced schools and the students are motivated. Very different if you're teaching very large classes, very sort of low resource context with students who may not be that motivated. So I think, again, it's one of those nice ideas, but the reality for most teachers is going to be very different. This idea that sort of technology will just come in the classroom and we'll just change our position, our role in the class. I don't think that's a reality for many of us. So I think, again, we can kind of step back from some of these sort of larger claims about how this will change how we teach, because the reality is very, very difficult to do that. At the same time, I think there are ways that AI can be extremely helpful for us, and I think can hopefully improve what we do in the classroom as teachers and how we interact with our students as well. I think AI does certain things really well and in some ways better than teachers. Things such as providing clear explanations for grammar and vocabulary. It's really good at generating examples, example sentences, example context for grammar and vocabulary as well. From a teacher's perspective, I think it can be fantastic for creating materials, reading tasks, different types of vocabulary and grammar activities for students as well. So I think it can be a fantastic tool for helping us and for helping our students to learn English better. But we don't need to go kind of all in on AI. Some of you may want to do that, and that's fine. But as a teacher, it's okay if you step back a bit from it and take a bit of time to sort of evaluate it and decide whether it works for you and decide what aspects of AI are going to be useful and what are not. And I think we can do that, and we don't have to rush in all the time to actually have to learn this all within a couple of weeks or a couple of months. We can take our time, slowly learn bits about it. And I think there is a point of sort of reassurance for me. I remember watching, ironically, there was a film came out, I don't know, about 20 years ago called AI, Artificial Intelligence. It was directed by Steven Spielberg. And it was set way in the future where there were robots which looked like humans and acted like humans and were all powered by AI. And I remember watching that film and seeing a woman in a kitchen, and she was using a very sort of traditional coffee making machine to make coffee. And I thought that was a bit weird. Like, in the future, why would they do that? Wouldn't they have some robot who could make it for them, or some extremely sort of advanced technology that could create the coffee for them? I then remember reading an interview with the director, I think it was Steven Spielberg, who said that they brought in these sort of futurists, these experts in what the future is going to be like. And one of the points they emphasized was that, however advanced technology gets, people will always crave a sort of an authentic human experience. Sometimes people need to touch things and feel and experience things directly rather than vicariously through technology. And I think you can see that in modern days in things like the resurgence of things like vinyl records. People like this idea of the physical record, putting it onto a turntable and listening to it. So I think as we move forward with AI, although there's this tendency to think that it's going to take over everything and everything's going to be digital and in the cloud, I think there is still going to be a real demand for face-to-face teaching. That doesn't mean that we can't use AI, but we can bring a lot of really authentic, real experiences to our students, which they can't experience with AI. However, what I will be trying to do in the next few weeks is to just put out a few videos explaining how you might be able to use AI as a teacher to improve what you do in the classroom, but it's not going to be trying to overwhelm with all the latest ideas and the latest developments. It's going to be about taking it slowly, learning little bit by bit how AI might be useful to you as a teacher. I hope you'll find that useful. All right. Sorry for the slightly meandering, wander through my brain and my thoughts about AI, but I'd be delighted to hear what you think about it. Are you using AI as an English language teacher? Do you feel it's going to have a massive impact on what we do? I know it will probably have a big impact in areas like, students' homework and plagiarism and essays. I'm not thinking too much about that at the moment, more about how it will impact what we do in the classroom. Delighted to hear your thoughts. But if that's it, nice to speak to you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.